The once familiar scene at the US-Canada border had suddenly turned heavy and somber. Long lines of motionless trucks stretched out in silence, engines shut down, drivers sitting blankly in their cabins, eyes filled with worry fixed on the checkpoint ahead. Inside the cold trailers, golden bags of corn, tons of soybeans, deep red slabs of beef, and plump wheels of cheese waited to be unloaded, but everything stood still, frozen in the bitter northern chill. The usual hustle and bustle was gone. No more blaring horns, no more customs officers calling out for paperwork checks. In its place was a tense silence, an atmosphere that felt like the eye of a storm was hovering overhead. Calm for now, but ready to strike. For American farmers, especially in the agricultural heartlands of the Midwest, the Canadian market had long been a rock-solid certainty. They believed that as long as they planted, nurtured, and harvested their crops, the northern border would always remain open to receive their goods. But that belief crumbled overnight when Ottawa suddenly erected an invisible wall, built not of bricks, but of dry, clinical lines of legal text. Under the banner of protecting health and food safety, Canada introduced a sweeping set of new regulations. Every shipment now had to document its entire journey: where the seeds were sown, what pesticides were used, how the goods were stored and transported. A single misstep could leave an entire convoy stranded at the frozen border, with the cargo inside inching closer by the hour to spoilage. On the surface, these policies might seem humane and reasonable, but look closer and it's clear this wasn't a coincidence. This was a calculated counterstrike, a soft blow that hurt more than tariffs ever could. It struck straight at the heart of American agriculture, at the farming communities that form a vital political backbone for Washington. The image brought back memories of 2018, when China hit back at the US by targeting soybeans from the Midwest. Now history was repeating itself, only this time the blow didn't come from Beijing, a longtime ally, one that had stood shoulder to shoulder with the US for decades. In that very moment, a larger question emerged. Had Canada just unveiled a new kind of weapon in the global trade game? Not tariffs, not barbed wire barriers, but lines of text embedded in technical regulations. And to understand it fully, we must look deeper into Ottawa's strategy, where technical barriers are being wielded like soft blades that cut just as deep as any hardline offensive. In modern trade wars, tariff numbers are often seen as the main weapon. But Ottawa chose a different path. No loud tax hikes, no market-shaking headlines. Instead, with nothing more than tangled regulations on paper, it managed to bring the entire flow of trade to a grinding halt. This is what's known as a technical barrier, a soft weapon with enough force to choke American agriculture. Under the new rules, any shipment crossing the border must come with documentation so detailed it practically inspects every speck of dust: where the corn variety was planted, what pesticides were sprayed, in what dosage, which brand of fertilizer was used, how the goods were stored and transported. All of it must be recorded. A missing signature, an unstamped document, or even a vague line of information is enough to bring the entire convoy to a stop, waiting indefinitely. And as the paperwork is flipped back and forth under scrutiny, inside the trailers, the corn begins to mold, the soybeans discolor, and the meat, milk, and cheese inch ever closer to spoilage with every passing hour. At first glance, this might seem like mere bureaucracy. In reality, it's a calculated strategy. On one hand, it protects Canadian farmers who have long complained that their local markets are being flooded with cheap American produce. On the other, it strikes directly at the Midwestern farming communities, the very base of strong support that Donald Trump once built his political platform on. Because when those communities are hurting, a wave of discontent is sure to ripple straight into Washington's political arena. What's telling is how the Canadian media continues to present it with calm assurance. This is merely a public health measure. But beneath that calm exterior lies a tit-for-tat maneuver, a move that follows the same trail as past disputes over steel tariffs, copper duties, and now agricultural goods. It's not just economic toughness, it's a stark reminder that even allies can become adversaries when national interests are on the line. And to truly see the impact of this soft weapon, you don't have to look far. Right in Iowa, the agricultural heart of America, golden cornfields and endless soybean silos are now bearing the brunt. It is here, in this very soil, that every grain, every hard-earned dollar of a farmer's livelihood is bleeding out, all because of cold, clinical lines of text from Ottawa. Iowa, the land long hailed as the heart of American agriculture, now feels as if it's buckling under the weight of an invisible storm. Endless cornfields stretched to the horizon, once symbols of prosperity, now turned into burdens for the very farmers who cultivated them. Normally, after each harvest season, corn and soybeans would flow northward by truck and train, crossing the border into the hands of Canadian consumers. But now, that path has been blocked. In just a matter of weeks, exports from Iowa to Canada have dropped by nearly half. Grain elevators that once ran at full capacity are now overflowing. Corn and soybeans are being dumped into makeshift outdoor piles left exposed to the elements, with the risk of total loss growing by the day. Corn and soybean prices have plummeted, falling below even the cost of production. Farmers are forced to sell at a loss just to clear out storage, and even that's a luxury compared to those who can't find a buyer at all. But the damage doesn't stop at the fields. Soy oil plants and animal feed producers who rely on the steady supply from Iowa's farmland are now in crisis. Many have had to cut shifts, scale back operations, or temporarily shut down. Thousands of workers have lost their job. Familiar and reliable market, Canada. But that stability shattered overnight, brought down by a wave of technical barriers imposed just across the border. Truckloads of beef, powdered milk, and cheese are now backed up at border checkpoints, stuck in lengthy inspections until the meat begins to lose its freshness, the milk sours, and the cheese spoils. Some shipments are forced to turn back. Others are outright rejected on the spot, delivering crushing losses to the entire production chain. With exports stalled, cattle prices have plunged. Herds that were once prized assets have turned into costly burdens. Many farmers with no way out have been forced to sell off their livestock at rock-bottom prices, or worse, cull their herds to cut down on feed expenses. It's a painful choice, but for many, it's the only one left. The consequences are spreading like a chain reaction. Slaughterhouses and meat processing plants are cutting operations. Within weeks, hundreds of workers have lost their jobs. The grain industry, closely tied to livestock, is suffering too. Trucks full of corn and wheat now sit idle in storage, unsold, as grain prices fall to their lowest levels in years. In rural Nebraska, businesses that rely on farming, tractor dealers, fertilizer suppliers, gas stations, general stores, are seeing customer after customer vanish. Entire communities built around agriculture and livestock are now sinking into the shadows of crisis. On family farms, a heavy gloom hangs in the air. Farmers in Nebraska have never felt this abandoned. Their hard-earned results are no longer determined by weather or harvests, but by cold, impersonal lines of trade policy. And as they look east toward neighboring Wisconsin, America's famed Dairyland, they know the storm isn't stopping here. Because if Nebraska is losing its cattle and grain, Wisconsin is bracing for a direct blow to its most treasured asset, the dairy and cheese industry, a source of pride that has defined its people for over a century. Wisconsin, lovingly known across America as Dairyland, has long been proud to call itself the capital of milk and cheese, where every drop of dairy not only feeds families, but also nourishes a cultural identity. From small family farms to large-scale processing plants, it's a tightly woven production network that has stood strong for decades. Wisconsin cheese once graced every party platter and grocery shelf in Canada, becoming an indispensable link in a seamless cross-border supply chain. But now, that image is beginning to crack. Massive cold storage facilities are filled to the brim with cheese, butter, and powdered milk. Products that once moved across the border in a matter of days, now stuck in place. Cheese supply contracts with Canadian supermarket chains are being canceled one by one. Dairy plants that once ran at full tilt are now scaling back operations, laying off workers en masse. On the farms, milk prices have plunged to record lows, dipping below the cost of feeding and milking the cows. For many families, that spells financial ruin. They're being forced to sell off their herds, animals that have been part of the family for generations, just to stop the financial bleeding. A cloud of tension now hangs over rural communities throughout Wisconsin. In small towns, grocery stores, farm equipment repair shops, and cafes sit eerily quiet. The people here understand a painful truth. Once the Canadian market is lost, it won't wait around. That space will quickly be filled by Canadian farmers or other global suppliers. And once Wisconsin's place is taken, the path back is almost non-existent. For this state, the crisis isn't just temporary, it's a long-term threat. The loss of reputation, of tradition, of the very Dairyland identity that has shaped them for generations. In the eyes of Wisconsin's farmers, uncertainty mixes with quiet anger. They know they're not just losing money to low prices, they're caught in the middle of a trade war far beyond their control. And Wisconsin isn't facing this storm alone. Just to the west, Minnesota, one of the largest agricultural exporters to Canada, is now watching its golden grains grind to a halt at the border, trapped between stacks of confusing inspection documents and the cold indifference of policy. Minnesota, a land of endless wheat fields, vast stretches of corn and soybeans reaching toward the horizon, is now sinking into crisis. For years, this state has taken pride in its geographic advantage. With just a single train ride or truck journey, its agricultural goods could easily cross the border into Canada, a long-standing and stable customer. But today, that advantage has turned into a burden. Freight trains loaded with wheat, corn, and soybeans now sit idle for weeks at inspection stations. What once took just a few days in transit is now delayed indefinitely, bogged down by the sheer complexity of origin and quarantine documentation. As grain sits motionless in rail cars, transport costs climb, while the reputation of Minnesota exporters erodes day by day. Some Canadian buyers, unwilling to wait any longer, have canceled contracts and turned to alternative suppliers. On the farms, frustrated growers watch as mountains of unsold grain pile up with no clear destination. Wheat prices have nosedived, at times reaching their lowest point in years. Many farmers have been forced to rent extra storage or dump grain outdoors, exposed to rain and sun. Trucking and rail logistics companies haven't escaped the fallout either. Revenues have plummeted, shifts have been cut, and workers are being laid off. A local economy that once ran smoothly on the rhythm of cross-border trade now sputters, like a massive engine grinding to a halt. Minnesota's greatest fear is losing its competitive edge. Once Canada turns to other suppliers, winning back trust and market share will be an uphill battle. People here are beginning to realize this isn't just a temporary disruption. It's a blow that could leave long-term scars on the map of American agriculture. And if Minnesota still holds on to some hope, thanks to its access to alternative distribution channels, the outlook further north, in North Dakota, is far more dire. For a state where nearly 80% of agricultural exports rely on Canada, the tightening of that critical lifeline has thrown the entire local economy into suffocating uncertainty, with no clear way out. North Dakota, the borderland once seen as the lifeline of American agriculture, is now gasping for air. No other state is as dependent on Canada as this one, with a staggering 80% of its export volume flowing north. For years, daily life here moved in sync with the steady stream of trucks and trains passing through checkpoints like Pembina and Portal, bound for Canadian cities. But now that familiar rhythm has vanished, replaced by long, silent lines of parked vehicles, drivers staring hopelessly at their clocks, while the produce behind them loses value by the hour. A single error in the quarantine paperwork, a missing fertilizer certificate, a misplaced signature in the traceability chain, is enough to get an entire shipment turned away. Corn, wheat, and soybeans now sit packed in overflowing storage, unsellable, pushing crop prices down by as much as 20%. Co-ops that once bought from local farmers are now refusing loads, with their silos maxed out. In small towns, people watch in dismay as a year's worth of sweat and labor turns into bags of wasted grain, all because of technical barriers across the border. The consequences are rippling outward. Flour mills, oil presses, and grain processors are slashing shifts, laying off workers. Gas stations, motels, and diners along the border, once thriving on trade traffic, now feel abandoned. Many families can no longer keep up with loan payments. The threat of bankruptcy looms larger by the day. For North Dakota, exporting to Canada isn't just a matter of trade. It's the economic lifeblood of entire communities. And when that lifeblood is cut off, the entire local economy enters a state of collapse. Never before have the people of North Dakota felt so exposed. They've come to realize that their fate doesn't lie in the hands of weather or soil, but in the hands of policymakers in Ottawa and Washington. That frustration is now hardening into a wave of anger, not just toward the Canadian government, but toward the White House as well, where they had hoped for protection that has yet to arrive. And as the cries for help from North Dakota join the pain felt in Iowa, Nebraska, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, a larger picture begins to emerge. This is no longer an isolated crisis in a handful of states. It is a calculated strike aimed at the very heart of American agriculture, and its consequences won't be confined to the fields. They will echo all the way into the halls of power in Washington, because when millions of farmers rise in outrage, an economic earthquake can swiftly turn into a political one. The US-Canada trade crisis has moved far beyond idle trucks at the border and overflowing grain silos. It has become a full-blown political earthquake, one whose tremors are shaking the very core of America's Midwest. As millions of farmers from Iowa to North Dakota face devastation, their outrage is no longer confined to the fields. It's echoing all the way to Washington. A surge of phone calls to lawmakers, desperate letters to federal agencies, and small-scale protests across rural towns. Together, these actions are building intense pressure on the nation's capital. Ottawa chose its target with precision. Rural America, the political stronghold of figures like Donald Trump, where every vote carries weight in national elections. And when farmers lose their livelihoods, they don't stay silent. They channel their frustration into action that has the power to shape American politics. The White House knows that if this crisis drags on, the damage won't stop at agriculture. The very foundation of political stability could begin to crack. More unsettling is the truth that Canada's move has laid bare. Even your closest ally can become a rival when national interests are on the line. This isn't just a momentary retaliation. It's a clear warning that in an increasingly unstable world, alliance loyalty is no longer guaranteed. The United States, already stretched thin in its trade battles with China in recent years, now finds itself under pressure from its own northern neighbor. And so, from the pain felt in farming communities to the mounting tension in Washington, one pressing question rises to the surface. Which path will America take to escape this spiral? Will Washington opt for negotiation to ease the strain, retaliation to send a message, or diversification to reduce its dependency on any one market? What future lies ahead for American agriculture now that the fertile lands of the Midwest have been pulled into the currents of global power politics? That is the next chapter waiting to unfold. If this crisis drags on, American agriculture could face one of its darkest chapters since the 1980s, a time when bankruptcies swept across the Midwest, leaving behind ghost towns and empty farms. What's unfolding today echoes that painful past. Plummeting crop prices, banks tightening credit, farmers forced to liquidate land, equipment, and even the herds they once considered their most valuable assets. The fallout isn't just financial, it's the shattering of a belief. The belief that America's vast farmlands were somehow shielded from the tremors of global disruption. In a globalized world, agriculture is no longer just about soil and seasons. It's a piece on the geopolitical chessboard. Each kernel of corn, each soybean, once thought to be simple produce, now carries the weight of international relations, trade negotiations, and high-level strategy. And farmers, the most down-to-earth among us, are the first to bear the cost whenever nations collide. To escape this spiral, America faces three possible paths. The first is negotiation, making concessions to Ottawa in order to restore the flow of trade. But that would mean backing down, accepting some of Canada's terms, a bitter pill for Washington to swallow. The second is retaliation, erecting similar barriers to choke Canadian goods. Yet that risks escalating the standoff into a full-blown trade war, with consequences far beyond the Farm Belt. The third path, diversifying into new markets, may offer the most sustainable future, but it requires time, investment, and patience, things many struggling farmers no longer have. No matter the choice, the immediate burden will fall hardest on rural communities. They are the living proof that in this new era, agriculture is no longer as secure as it once seemed. It is fragile, exposed, and entangled in forces far beyond a farmer's reach. And in the end, this story isn't just about harvests. It's about how America will redefine its strategy to protect the soul of its agriculture in a world that grows more uncertain every day. The current US-Canada agricultural crisis is clear proof that trade has never been just about buying and selling. Behind every truckload of corn, every rail car of wheat, every cold storage full of cheese lies a web of political maneuvering and power dynamics. When Ottawa erected its technical barriers, it wasn't just grain that was stopped at the border. It was the livelihood, the faith, and the future of millions of American farm families that were left stranded in the balance. In today's world, there is no longer room for naive beliefs in pure free markets. Every flow of goods can become a weapon, and every policy dressed in the language of safety or protection can turn into a devastating strike on the international stage. Farmers, honest people rooted in the land, are the first to suffer in this whirlwind. They plant seeds to create life, yet those very grains are being turned into pawns in games far beyond their control. The US-Canada standoff is also a broader reminder. There are no eternal allies, only eternal interests. And when those interests collide, even longtime partners can become opponents. The question now is, how will America respond? Will it remain passive and accept the blow, or take charge and forge a new path to protect the soul of its agriculture? Thank you for staying with us until the end of this video. If you found these insights valuable, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. We'll see you again in the next video, where we'll continue unraveling the geopolitical and economic shifts shaping our world today.